Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have a fun topic around why is it that reading erotica books, novels, and stories can be so helpful for women over 40 in terms of their libido. This is a really multifold issue, and there are many different layers, both physical and psychological, that are happening beneath the surface. So it's pretty common knowledge that as we get to certain ages, there can be changes in things like hormones, neurotransmitter activity, health and mental health issues, and even things like stress and body image. So in particular, in women that are over 40 heading into perimenopause, there can be changes in estrogen levels, declining estrogen, which can create all kinds of different issues. There can also be lower testosterone, which is closely tied to libido and arousal. There can be changes in dopamine and serotonin, which have to do with mood, changes in oxytocin receptors that can have an impact on bonding, satisfaction, and relationships. There can be physical changes, such as in blood flow and circulation to various areas that are important to libido, including the brain. There can be changes in the brain's ability to form new neural pathways, which could impact maintaining strong arousal. There may also be life and stress issues, changes in responsibilities, worries about health, changes in relationships, and all of those different types of life and stage of life changes can have a big impact on cortisol levels, which are connected with stress. And all of that can heavily influence libido. There can also be changes in self-perception and body perception. As physical changes occur, the way that the person feels about themselves can be influenced. So there are a lot of things that are happening both physiologically and psychologically at the same time, and many of those changes can have an impact on libido, desire, and arousal. So why is erotica actually prescribed for women who are experiencing those challenges? Well, helping to address some of the physical and psychological issues by practicing a regular diet of having arousing thoughts or reading arousing stories can actually increase blood flow to the different areas in the body that are connected to libido. It can also create sensations of pleasure, which creates a reduction in stress and cortisol. Knowing that stress can greatly inhibit libido by reducing stress and doing something that's relaxing, pleasurable, rewarding can actually assist with libido. There's also the practice of mental stimulation, and we often talk about building neural pathways. So building and reinforcing neural pathways around a particular subject matter can sometimes make it easier to come back to that subject matter, to make it a well-worn pathway in the brain, which allows for a continuous return to that sensation and those feelings. If we leave it sit and we don't do anything using the neural pathways that are associated with those thoughts, over time, they kind of fade out. And I would add, like as a personal note, and certainly this could be more subjective than it is objective, but I would add that the stories don't even need to be personally fulfilling. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of different subtypes and genres within erotica literature, and everybody kind of has their own thing that they like. And I think that that's perfectly fine. But I think even simply the exposure to that type of a story, provided that it's not stressful, meaning not pulling triggers and causing harm in some way, perhaps reactivating an old trauma and that sort of thing. So as long as one is mindful of one's own triggers and concerns and the types of things you definitely don't want to read or engage with, if it is good or neutral, then simply the exposure of that subject matter can help to reinforce those neural pathways, thinking those types of thoughts in terms of helping to activate or reactivate libido. So simply put, not all stories have to be perfect. Not every story you pick up has to be that perfect match to exactly what you like. Sometimes just simply the exposure to a storyline that is remotely arousing can be helpful. There can be also activation of the limbic system, whereas erotic content engages areas of the brain associated with emotion and arousal, and that can help to trigger neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine. And through the activity of having those arousing thoughts, in some women, it can actually cause more production of testosterone and estrogen. And both of those play a very key role with libido. So we may actually be able to stimulate or increase some of those things through creating those thought patterns and coming back to that as a practice in a similar way that you might come to meditation as a practice, a daily ritual of some kind. You are training your mind to be capable of going back in that direction if perhaps you've otherwise lost interest or had reduced interest. You can find your way into creating that pathway, that familiar groundwork that you can keep returning to, where it becomes almost a habit. There can be some release of dopamine, which is a reward neurotransmitter, can help create cognitive engagement with the storyline or the subject matter, and kind of reconnect with that libido on a cognitive level first if the struggle is there to connect physiologically. And it can also really be a great stimulus in terms of responsive desire. So a lot of times as we get older, women may experience more of a responsive desire versus a spontaneous desire, meaning that we respond to stimuli versus feeling a natural inspiration towards arousing thoughts. It's almost like we have to have a prompt as opposed to it happening as naturally as it did when perhaps we were 22, for example. It's also a lovely way to explore things in a safe way without getting involved in a real life capacity. And that can be helpful for someone getting the chance to explore ideas and concepts and behaviors and activities that maybe they don't feel comfortable or wouldn't feel comfortable doing in real life, but they have the opportunity to explore them in a fantasy capacity, which can help to kind of widen their desire and their scope in terms of libido. And depending on the writer and the story itself, it can also give them some confidence in perhaps learning how to articulate things that they are desiring. So if they read a story about someone who's a little bit bolder or is asking for what they want, it can help to instill some confidence and the opportunity to consider and reflect on what they do actually want and which things actually help turn them on versus turn them off. And I would like to bring forward a particular type of story that I think I would really personally like to see more of, but I think it would be like perhaps even clinically useful from a psychological perspective. And that is more erotica stories that are centered around women over 40, or perhaps just even over 25 or 30. Just women who are not quite so young, because I do notice that many heroines in some of these stories they're very young. For a woman over 40, it's not very interesting as a reader, and it's very difficult to relate to. So I would like to see more stories that have older in a variety of different life situations, and I have come across some really good ones. And, they may be women who are dealing with being in the sandwich generation between older parents and children. Women who are dealing with a variety of different mental health and self-esteem issues. And that brings me to the importance of seeing erotica stories for women of all body types, for women of all ages, for women of all abilities and disabilities, for women who may have a particular concern that is limiting in terms of libido. So we mentioned body perception, for example, and I've come across some wonderful stories about women who are not the body type that you see in some standard stories, perhaps that are more mainstream. And I think that can be really interesting from a psychological perspective in terms of enhancing body image, which will have a very direct impact on libido, feeling that sense of self-confidence. So incorporating some differences across different women. Now, I do understand obviously why certain stories sell, because they want to make it general enough that it's going to engage a large audience and bring in sales and that sort of thing. But I really think that there could be a niche for women over 40 who have been beginning to get prescribed reading erotica for libido issues. And it would be lovely if there was more variety out there. Not everything can be Twilight. So having stories that feature relatability and representation, women with diverse body types, ages, life experiences can really help readers to see themselves represented positively within that storyline. And that can have a huge impact on self-esteem and sexual confidence. It can also help to normalize things to create more realistic scenarios that actual reader may find herself actually in, as opposed to getting swept off to a desert island and randomly meeting someone who's she perceives as 10 times more attractive than her. It just would be interesting to see what would happen if we had a more real life type of scenario being played out in some of these stories. It could even incorporate some things around aging in relationship to libido. So there could be some topics and themes that get addressed in a positive way that could be very healing and encouraging for the reader. It is worth noting that everybody likes different things, and sometimes the more fantastical the story is, the easier it is for the reader to engage or to feel like they are being a little bit swept away, perhaps swept out of their ordinary lives and given the opportunity to imagine and experience something quite different. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with those types of stories. It really is just about creating enough variety that everybody can kind of find their own thing that they like. And as I mentioned, it's not necessarily essential that the story feels like a perfect fit every time, because a lot of these neuroscientific and physiological and psychological benefits that we talked about can happen even if you don't love every story, even if it's not an exact fit for you or it's not exactly a representation of you feeling a connection with character. Sometimes just that little bit of exposure to that type of story gets your mind thinking in a different way. I know sometimes for me, it's even like how I would write it better, like how I would create a better story if I were the one taking it to the next chapter. So I hope you found this to be insightful and interesting. If you are interested in topics around mood, mindset, managing your own psychology, and you'd like to try hypnosis, I do have a hypnosis membership, and you can check out information on that in the show notes. And until we connect the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.